He's also, this judge, not only righteous, but holy. That's what the word clear means. And be clear when thou judgest. The word clear does not mean that God's judgment is easy to understand. That's true. But that's not what the word clear means in the text. The word clear means pure or clean, free from pollution and corruption. This judge cannot be bribed and does never make any mistakes in his courtroom. He is the spotlessly pure and holy judge of heaven and earth. And David justifies this judge. He declares that this judge is righteous. Whatever this judge decides concerning David's case, as David stands before this judge, will be perfectly righteous by virtue of the fact that this judge is God himself. David does not protest against this judge. He does not refuse to recognize the authority of this judge. He's not like the criminals in courtrooms today who are dragged before the judge loudly protesting their innocence and screaming that they will not recognize the authority of the judge. No, David stands before the judge with his mouth closed, knowing that he has broken God's law, knowing he has not got a legal leg to stand on, and knowing he has no defense. He just waits to hear what God's judgment will be. And that's why the text says that thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest. That word "that" in the text is purpose. There are two ideas in the text. The first idea is that God is just. Or rather, the first idea is that all sin is against God. That's the first idea. All sin is against God. And the second idea then is that God has the right to judge it, to make judicial decisions concerning it. And so there are no actions committed by men or angels which do not come under the judgment of God. We can describe it this way. A judge will only decide judicially on cases which are in his own jurisdiction. So, for example, an American judge will not listen to a case concerning a German citizen who commits a crime in Australia, because that would be outside of his jurisdiction. That would have nothing whatsoever to do with him. He would not have the authority to decide on that case. But God is the universal judge. He rules over the entire world, over the entire universe. And so any action which takes place in any part of the universe comes under his jurisdiction, and he has the right to judge it, to decide concerning it. But now, as David stands before the judge who has jurisdiction over him and over all men, he is painfully aware of this truth, that if God is just, he must perish, because he has committed sin and great evil against God. And so he confesses to God, I deserve to perish everlastingly in hell because of my sin. I have nothing with which I can plead. And only one who can say that truthfully from his heart is ready to receive forgiveness from God. Because God will only forgive those who confess their sin and turn away from their sin. Those who say that they deserve to go to hell because of their sin, they are actually the ones who go to heaven and are forgiven. And those who say that they deserve to go to heaven because of their supposed good works, they are the ones who actually perish forever in hell. That's the only reason any of us would dare ever to confess our sin. We know there is forgiveness with God. We sang of that in the Psalms. There is forgiveness with thee, that thou mayest be feared. And so, God terrifies us with a sense of his justice. He shows us the horror of our sin. And then he speaks to us the comfort of pardon. But to those who come before God in their self-righteousness, boasting of their works, God does not give pardon to them. The Pharisee, unlike the publican in Jesus' parable, did not come before God and say, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. But he came boasting of all the great things he had done. And he, unlike the poor publican, did not go home justified. And many today boast that they will be in heaven one day because of all of their good works. But they will never see heaven because they have not confessed their sin and turned away from their sin in true repentance. But David, he confesses his sin and he repents from his sin. Notice the tense in which he confesses his sin. I have sinned and have done this evil in thy sight. That's the perfect tense. And in Hebrew, the perfect tense is used when an action from the perspective of the speaker or writer is finished. And so from David's perspective, his sin is finished. He is saying, I have sinned, but no more, God. I'm turning away from my sin. I'm putting my sin away. I hate my sin. Help me to get rid of it. That's the language of repentance. Because David knows his guilt before God. He knows he has committed evil. He knows he has broken the law of God. And he knows that he needs to hear the mercy of God. But God will only forgive sin when his justice has been satisfied. Remember, he is a perfectly just and righteous judge. And so if God is just, he cannot forgive David his sin unless David's sin is paid for. And so when God came to David after he confessed his sin and said, Thou shalt not die, the Lord hath put away thy sin, God had Jesus Christ in mind. That was the only way in which David could hear that blessed forgiveness. God had Jesus Christ in mind. In God's decree, Jesus Christ was coming. He had not come yet. He had not yet laid down his life and died on the cross for David's sin. But as far as God was concerned, God had decreed it. It was as good as done. And that's why God did not cut off David in his sin. Because God had promised, before this horrible sin took place, that he was going to send the Christ through the line of David. And so now God cannot cut off David, because if God cuts off David, the Christ cannot come. And he will not be able to keep his promise to David. And that would be impossible. God cannot break his promise to David. So the Christ does come. Jesus Christ comes, dies on the cross, and pays for the horrible deeds of David and for all his elect people. And so those who are wicked and depraved, who have broken God's law, who are rebels against the high King of heaven, are saved by the work of Jesus Christ. And the righteous law of God comes and screams vengeance against David and against all of God's people, and says this sinner must die because he's broken the law of God. And God's mercy says, no, this sinner shall not die because I love this sinner.